Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 29 of Divergent Dialogues. Today, we're going to be talking about what is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Unfortunately, this is a common experience for a lot of neurodivergent folks. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria is characterized by intense emotional and physical reactions to perceived or actual rejection or criticism. So, RSD feels like an emotional wound, leading to feelings of shame, inadequacy, and even panic, which are more severe than typical responses to rejection. I think, I guess it's really important to highlight that, this is a legitimate challenge that a lot of neurodivergent folks experience. And, as a neurodivergent person, like we have a mind and a body that is really sensitive. And that includes emotional reactions and reactions to these sorts of experiences. I don't want to throw you under the bus, Teena, but I've heard that you've had some of these experiences.
Throw me under the bus. It's fine. Pay back for that job interview way back when. Yes, I do. I definitely do experience rejection sensitivity. I think it's really important to note that it's not like a personal failing where you're just too sensitive to things. It is actually like a neurological difference, especially there's some links for in ADHDers around those difference in neurotransmitters, like around particularly around like dopamine and the norepinephrine. I think I pronounced that right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I
can
just
never
cut
say
the
it
middle part because it's too hard to get my tongue around, so I just invent new words. Oh, one of my bucket list things is actually to get a word listed in the Oxford. So yeah, just chipping away at it.
This could be the start of that journey.
Yeah, renaming neurotransmitters. But yeah, in ADHD, there has been some links made around those differences in neurotransmitters, which do result in the emotion regulation and impulse control, which is a component of that feeling of rejection and being so sensitive to that. And yeah, it really is this horrible feeling because for me there's this rational part of my brain, that rational logical part of my brain that's screaming at me, sort of saying, Teena, you're being ridiculous, come on. But then there's all this other stuff that it still feels the feels, and like it absolutely, I shut down and go into this little cocoon where I can't speak. It's you lose the ability to speak, or it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling.
Yeah, and I think in addition to the neurological differences, unfortunately, a lot of autistic and ADHDers do experience a lot of actual rejection and bullying and criticism. And we experience this from a very young age. So this can be from our parents or our siblings, or when we go to school, can be peers or teachers. And when you're repeatedly told over and over and over again that, there's something wrong with you, or you're different, or you're ignored or excluded, it makes a lot of sense that your brain and your body is primed to perceive rejection.
Mm.
And I find that a lot of late diagnosed neurodivergent folks, like it's tricky sometimes because due to the double empathy problem where people of different neurotypes may communicate differently. Like there may be legitimate times where they are excluded or they are rejected. But also there are other times where maybe they're not, and they're just kind of primed to think, oh, well, my friend hasn't messaged me back for 3 days, so they must hate me. like
Yeah.
jumping to these sorts of things. And so it, as a neurodivergent person, like even as a therapist, supporting people who experience rejection sensitivity, it can be hard to sift through because you don't want to invalidate the genuine experiences that they're having, but also you want to support them to have a more balanced view of what's actually going on. Because sometimes, unfortunately, like if you think that everyone around you doesn't like you, it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy where someone's not texting you and then you go, oh, they're not texting me, they mustn't like me, so then you don't text them, and then they do the same, and then no one's texting anyone, and then it's been 3 years and you forgot their name. So
or you haven't received a text in 3 days from that friend, so you decide, yeah, absolutely, they just hate me now, and you know what, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. I'm going to let them know. And yeah, you send this big angry text message about a million different things and whatever else, and yeah, and it's just like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were caught up in exams. Yeah, please delete my previous message.
yeah, 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 exactly. So I think, it's important to validate that these are genuine feelings, and like whether or not the rejection is perceived or actual, the neurodivergent person is still having these big feelings that are difficult to process. And yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes it is actual rejection as well. Um, but I think we'll talk a little bit in the next episode more about ways to be able to, support rejection sensitivity. But yeah, I guess for you, Teena, did you want to share a little bit about, I guess, what do you think has contributed to rejection sensitivity for you? Like we talked a little bit about, I guess, developmentally, neurodivergent people and their experiences. I guess, did that kind of echo your experience growing up?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, growing up, that constant message around, uh, settle down, don't, stop talking, messages that essentially let me know that I was annoying, or yeah, just not enough or too much, all of those kinds of messages that young neurodivergent people, especially like ones that don't know, well, not especially, but yeah, ones that don't know they're neurodivergent, those messages around, yeah, being too much, not enough, or whatever that might be. And then I think, I have to say, I think being a woman in this world has definitely contributed to my RSD, in that being that, you move into your relationships, and our world our world has, and the world of psychiatry as well, like the Western world, all of those worlds that we are in professionally and privately, I suppose, frame women as being hysterical, neurotic. So from the get-go, we are overreacting, we're too sensitive, we're carrying on, air quotes, all those kinds of things. And moving into relationships where I wasn't treated so well, and my feelings, my needs weren't even considered, let alone prioritized. So once again, that message of being told, you're too much, you're overreacting, being selfish, like, how can you be talking about that when this is happening for me? And it's just like, oh, okay, sorry. So yeah, just that, always sort of being told that no, there's no time for you, there's no space for you. That has absolutely contributed to that heightened sense of hypervigilance to perceived or real rejection, where now I think that yeah, any kind of facial expression, tone of voice is a massive one for me. I can pick up in a person's tone if it's different to their sort of normal tone. And I mean, why it's different, that's where the rejection sensitivity kind of skews the message, because I'm always going to assume that it's because of me, influenced by me, directed at me, but probably not always. Or most of the time. So yeah, I can absolutely pick up when there is a shift in someone's tone. And I think the other thing that really contributes to escalating my experience of rejection is when when I might ask the question, "Oh, what's wrong? You sound cranky, or you sound whatever." "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." And it's like, no, not. I can tell there's something, and in sometimes it's like the person's choosing to be vague, hide it, lie about that thing that I've picked up on, not because of anything, they're not an asshole, nothing's bad. It's just because, maybe they themselves know that they're being a bit short and, sharp because they didn't get any sleep, or someone cut them off in traffic and they're still brooding about it, whatever. Or maybe I did do something that irritated them, but they also are aware that it's a them problem, not a me problem. So they don't want to confront me with that. So, they're choosing that actually this isn't something that I want to talk about. So I'm telling you I'm fine. But because of my hypervigilance and hyper awareness to all of those things, I'm like, you're not fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which then, of course, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have a few different thoughts there. So I guess, well, two branches of thoughts. Number one is that, I work with a lot of late diagnosed folks, and I have noticed that in particular, um, well, actually, no, not in particular. I think it's challenging as a like a AFAB person growing up, because at least in Western culture, there is this expectation that as like female, presenting, that you will be social and you'll have a group of friends, and like you'll be able to navigate these challenging social situations. And I think um, a lot of like boys kind of growing up, often a lot of boys, they'll have interests, so like special interests that they can kind of connect with. So even if there are kind of challenges in finding people who can kind of meet them like socially and get along, it's kind of like, okay, well, I can kind of join in on this activity to facilitate that. But I think particularly once we get into high school, a lot of those kind of special interests fall away. Like, in the primary school, it's, the different fads and what have you. So I think there's a really big pressure to, I guess, be social, but a lot of challenges in that. And then it's kind of like you're trying to force these friendships or force these social situations, because you feel like there's this expectation that you should. And then it just, yeah, kind of goes a bit haywire. Um, my other thought was that often as neurodivergent folks, we do tend to have other neurodivergent people in our lives. And I have a few people around me who are definitely alexithymic, and I will pick up on their emotions before they do. And I'll be like, hey, like, I'm getting a sense that, like, maybe this is what's going on. They're like, no, definitely isn't. No. And then, like, an hour later, like, yeah, actually, I think you had a point. I do actually think that's what was happening. I'm like, yep, all right, I'm happy. I'm happy you're there now. But also, like, obviously, as neurodivergent people, like, we have a lot of these common experiences growing up where we may feel criticized and rejected. So if it's like two neurodivergent people, both feeling like rejected and RSD and having these sensitivities, it can be really challenging to navigate that relationship, because you're both equally as sensitive and primed to have these sorts of reactions. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, friendships and relationships are lost because there's a lot of vulnerability in having these open, honest conversations, and then things go unsaid, and then the friendship or the relationship kind of dissolves.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember working with someone once, and they were absolutely certain that their relationship was ending. Total disconnect. No, gonna have to end it. And after a few sessions of, talking things through and everything, what it actually was that they needed to talk to their partner about something, and kind of put an expectation out there, but they were so certain that the partner was going to respond badly and ultimately reject them, that rather than have that conversation, they were just going straight to breakup. And the conversation ended up happening organically one day, and then they came back in. They're like, "Oh no, we don't need to break up anymore." Had the conversation, and it turns out it's all fine. I'm like, "Oh, oh, cool. Anyway, you should have told me about that conversation you were needing to have." That was the thing that was, generating this sense of the relationship ending. Yeah, and I think that it's, we could laugh about that hindsight sort of thing, but going through it, and that wasn't over a few hours or a few days. This was churning for months. And when you recognize the severity and the significance of it, we're not talking about like this sense of discomfort that is kind of like, oh, I need to have, one of those courageous conversations with my partner. Oh, I'm nervous. It's not that. I think it's often over fairly small, insignificant things, which then means it's really hard to say, hey, there's this thing, it's kind of little, I get it, but I'm having this massive reaction to it, and it's a really big deal. So can we please talk about it with kindness, gentle sensitivity? Yeah, maybe tomorrow we can laugh about it, but right now it's actually a gaping hole in my heart. And because, you like looked at me with a neutral expression when I smiled at you. And yeah, so I think that recognizing that it is something quite significant and sometimes crippling. So be kind to yourself, like just yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, like, if you're going around every day having all these negative evaluations of yourself, like that's going to really impact on your self-esteem. It's going to impact on your mental health. And, but again, like when you've had all these experiences, it makes sense that your brain is primed in that way. Um, Something that I find that can be really common for a lot of people that experience RSD is that often they may think that perhaps they have like depression, and for some folks they might, but when there's a pattern of experiencing this depression in the context of interpersonal conflict or interpersonal challenges, that's
Mm.
when I go, maybe it's RSD that's kind of going on, because it does tend to be a bit more fleeting. But in saying that, sometimes, especially autistic folks, like we can ruminate quite long on some of these sorts of things. And, we can kind of ruminate on a feeling or on a thought or on a situation. And, like we've all had we're just about to fall asleep and we remember like a cringe interpersonal interaction from like 10 years ago, and we just can't we can't live with ourselves in that moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess yeah, it's in. I think RSD is something that's really important for people to understand, because, um, if it's if someone's being supported for depression, but it's actually RSD that's part of the picture, how we support that is going to look very different. And RSD can get in the way of a lot of friendships. And like something that's common for my clients is they'll be like, oh my gosh, like I haven't like responded to my friend's message from like 4 months ago. They must hate me. Like if I message them, they're going to be so upset with me. And off, like, maybe there might be some people who react in that way, but generally, like if they're your true friend, they'll be like, oh, like I'm glad that you're messaging me. But also, like, you know they if they want to reach out, or if they have an issue with it, like that's kind of their responsibility to talk up about that as well. So like it's not all up to you. Like if you're someone that experiences RSD, like it's not all up to you to just figure it all out. Like a relationship, it is like a two-way process.
Mm.
So yeah, so I guess get the other person involved in that process.
Yeah, because you're so right, because as from the perspective of someone who experiences RSD, and I think what's also really important here to mention is that the other thing, like we're told that we're sensitive, overreacting, all of those kinds of things, but the other thing that is commonly sort of suggested is that it's a self-esteem issue, or a self-confidence issue type thing. The reason why I'm experiencing all of this perceived rejection is because I just don't think highly enough of myself. And sometimes that is true. Maybe that is a part of someone's like profile, and they need support to build their self-esteem. But all of these things, what they're ultimately telling us is that it's your problem, Teena. You need to go off to individual therapy and build your self-confidence, build your self-esteem, build resilience and reduce your sensitivity, blah, 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 blah. It's a you problem. And so it really does kind of reinforce that conditioning around, especially as a woman, that I'm not to burden people with my issues or my distress, or any of those kinds of things, that it's for me to resolve and me to fix. But with RSD, it absolutely is like a shared repair thing, because it's not necessarily about saying that, hey, Caitlin, you need to look at me this way, talk to me this way, respond to my text messages within this amount of time in order to not trigger my RSD. That's not what it's about. It's about saying, hey, this is something that I live with, and I need to communicate differently. This is me. So it's not necessarily about asking you to manage my emotions and all those kinds of things. It's just about, kind of offering it out, like, hey, this is a little piece of me that's a bit fragile sometimes. Can I just trust you to treat it with care, and just, yeah, handle it gently. Think of it like like one of those little Fabergé eggs that they have in the movies, and they frame as being super valuable but ugly.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah. And I guess like, RSD, it doesn't happen in isolation. And at the end of the day, the healing really is going to happen in relationships. And, that's in relationships with people that are kind and caring and considerate, and are, able to have those open conversations and discussions around, like it's kind of like a meta discussion of, let's take a step back and go, okay, like I'm having these thoughts and these feelings. Like, is this actually what's going on here? Or could it be something else? And at the end of the day, like even in therapy, like sometimes a client may have an experience where they're like, oh, this is going on with my friend or my partner, and this is kind of what I'm thinking, but I'm not sure. And like we can explore all of the different alternatives of what could be going on based on, I guess, what the client says. But at the end of the day, the only person who's going to be able to really confirm that is the other person.
Mm.
But it can be really tricky, and it can be really vulnerable to take that step to be like, hey, like, when you don't text me back, like, within a few days, like I'm like, that makes me really stressed. That makes me think that you don't like me or whatever. And that gives the person the opportunity to go like, hey, like I'm actually really busy. So like, I'm sorry, like probably you're not going to get a response straight away, or it might be 2 or 3 days. Like, it doesn't mean that I don't like you. I love talking to you, but I just, because of my responsibilities in my life, that's, that's what I'm able to commit to in a relationship,
Mm.
friendship, or whatever. Anyway, that's just an example.
Yeah.
Um, and but I think then it just kind of sets up those expectations of like, okay, well, they told me like, they're not going to respond straight away. So if they don't, then I don't have to like be as stressed about it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I think that very often it is the person who has higher emotional needs or higher sensitivity in a relationship. It's usually that person that is labeled as problematic, that needs to do something different. And again, sometimes, yes, there might be all these other things going on, and that person might need some support with emotion regulation and things like that. But if we're talking, more generally, it's sometimes it comes down to compatibility. If you are someone who has high emotional needs, then finding friendships and partners who have similar expectations in relationships around how frequently you communicate, and how often you have like emotion-based conversations and relationship-focused conversations. Because if you partner with someone who is like has much lower emotional needs, then it's always going to be problematic, because the person with low needs is going to be like, oh my God, you're so clingy. And the person who has high needs is going to be like, oh my God, you're so withdrawn and,
Yeah.
just disconnected. And potentially neither person is problematic in their approach to life and relationships. It's just that there's a bit of a mismatch because of their level of need for, emotional support, connection, and all those kinds of things. So yeah, just because the people around you might be telling you, you're too much or whatever, it's not always true. Maybe it's just that they don't have capacity to engage in, emotion focused conversations and reassurance type behaviors as often as you might need them to.
Yeah, and I think it's true. Like, I think it's really important to have those conversations, like not just in like romantic relationships, and any kind of can be with family, can be with friends. And you're exactly right. Like, it's like for some people you might be too much, but for others you might be just right. And I think, particularly a lot of the times when there is like a friendship between like a neurodivergent person and a neurotypical person, because of those communication differences, it can be really challenging. And whereas for like neurodivergent folks, it's just like, yep, we get it. Like, we get it. But even so, like, every neurodivergent person is different. So I think at the end of the day, like, it is, relationships, they are, what's the word? Oh gosh, I'm having one of those, those ADHD moments where your brain just completely deletes a word out of your brain, but you can kind of sort of remember what it is.
Yeah, every day.
Compromise? Is it
Oh,
compromise? Kind
that's
of.
the word I always forget, which is embarrassing given I'm a therapist and I'm often talking about the need for compromise.
Maybe is that like, maybe that's a thing. Like, if you forget about it, does that have
Oh,
a deeper meaning? No.
maybe because I'm low on empathy and I don't want to compromise.
I don't know. Anyway,
Dare I say?
I guess I'm trying to say is that like, you know, relationships need to be consensual. And if you're going into a friendship with someone and going, hey, like, as a friend, these are kind of my expectations and these are kind of my boundaries. Like, is that like, is that a good fit for you or whatever? And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And, obviously it's not a set and forget, things change. But,
Mm.
if you go to someone and you're like, look, these are my needs and this is my expectations and these are my boundaries. And that person's like, no, I can't give that to you. Then it's just like, it's hard to get something from someone when they don't have the capacity to be able to give you that. And, and for some people, they might have many friends where they'll kind of go from person to person so that they can meet their social needs and things like that. So there's no one right way to go about
Mm.
it. But I think it's important that there is that communication and that clear understanding around those expectations and boundaries, and both party, whoever's involved is consenting to that and going, yep, like that does work for me. And I can, otherwise, if there's no discussion and you have all these expectations and then you feel let down because the other person isn't meeting them, they may have been happy to meet them, but they just didn't know that there were these expectations.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was leaving one of the teams I worked for, um, when I worked for someone else.
They who shall not be named.
Yes. Yeah. I had a colleague that I worked with, and she was a bit older than I was, so her kids had they were sort of grown up. Mine were still young, and we got on really well when we worked together. And yeah, I was leaving, and on my last day, it was like, oh well, we're probably not going to actually see each other again. And she said to me, it was probably the most awkward conversation I've ever had, but I've also never felt so comfortable in a conversation before either. Because she said to me, she's like, well, look, I want to propose that maybe we could be friends, outside of work. And I'm like, oh yes, I would enjoy that. I like your company. And she said, well, I know you've got young kids, and she goes, I'm thinking maybe we could interact every 6 weeks or so. And I'm like, well, actually, that sounds good. I think I could actually manage that. And we had this conversation where we laid out how we would communicate. We agreed that she was all over the music scene, which is something we connected on, and so she was happy to send out invites, and I would respond. And everything was organized in that conversation for how our friendship was going to run from there out. And I walked away thinking, fuck, that was weird, but gee, that felt good.
Yeah, yeah.
It
It
was
reminds me
awesome.
of like a much less extreme version, but have you ever watched Big Bang Theory?
Oh, only bits and pieces.
So like in Big Bang Theory, Sheldon, he has, I forget what they're called, like he has these contracts. So like he has his contracts with his friends. So I think there's like a roommate agreement, and then when eventually he gets a partner, there's like this relationship agreement, and it's obviously it's over exaggerated and it's huge and it has all these stipulations and clauses. So by no means am I saying to do that necessarily, but yeah, like for some people, they'd be like, that's really odd. But to me, that sounds completely reasonable. And I mean, like, look at our friendship. Like we meet up once a week over Zoom, and that works for us. And sometimes we might message in between, or not always, or obviously when we're recording the podcast and things like that. But it's kind of like there's a scheduled Zoom call every week. I know I'm going to talk to Teena, and like I don't have to worry about it. It's just like set and
Yeah.
forget type thing. And if we message in between, great. But it's just, and I think a lot of my friends as well, like are neurodivergent, so and might have kids and jobs and all this sort of stuff. So like we don't talk every day, we don't even talk every week, sometimes not even every month. But when we catch up, it's really great, and we really enjoy each other's company. So I think it's also about
Mm.
changing the expectation of what friendships and relationships look like. And it's like, well, if I had someone who was like, if I had like heaps of friends that were messaging me every day, like I'd personally find that very overwhelming. It's not that I don't like them, it's not that I don't want to talk to them, it's just like for me as an autistic person, like that feels like a very big commitment. And
Mm.
so,
Yeah, absolutely.
so
Mm.
yeah, so I think we might wrap it up there. And in our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about some strategies to cope with rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Yep. Looking forward to it.